The war had ended just a few hours ago. Smoke still danced above the broken metal and shattered rock. The ground was black from ash and fire. Sergeant Kyle Morgan stepped over the remains of a collapsed structure. His boots crunched on broken glass and pieces of metal armor. He moved slowly, scanning the wreckage with tired eyes. He had seen enough of war to last 100 lifetimes. But then he heard a sound he couldn't ignore, a soft cry, faint but real, a whimper coming from deep under a pile of burnt steel. He froze for a moment. No one else was supposed to be alive here. This was the edge of the blast zone where both sides had fallen in the final strike. Humans and the alien Varians had died here together. Cautiously he moved closer and dropped to his knees. He pulled back a scorched metal panel. Underneath was more rubble, but the sound grew louder, a cry full of fear and pain. With his bare hands he cleared the debris piece by piece. His fingers bled, but he kept going, and then he saw here a small child curled up tightly under a broken support beam. Her skin was pale blue. Her silver eyes were wide and glowing faintly in the shadows. She looked no older than 6. Her face was streaked with dust, and her clothes were torn. Kyle's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't human. She was Vara, the enemy. His instincts told him to back away, to call for command, to follow protocol. But something in her eyes stopped him. She was terrified. She was shaking, and she looked at him not like an enemy soldier, but like a child begging to live. He reached out his hand slowly. She didn't move. He spoke softly. "It's okay, you're safe now." The girl didn't answer, but her cry faded into quiet sobs. Gently he lifted the beam off her and pulled her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her tiny frame trembling against his chest. She held onto his jacket like her life depended on it. Kyle looked around. There were no medics, no officers, no one to stop him. War was over, but the rules still hung in the air like smoke. He didn't care. He made a choice in that moment, a choice that would change everything. He carried her through the wreckage, avoiding the patrol drones, avoiding the recovery teams. Walked for miles under the cover of night. Every step was dangerous. Every breath was a gamble. But he didn't stop. He couldn't explain why. All he knew was that leaving her behind would haunt him forever. He reached an old evacuation shelter hidden in the hills. It was cold and quiet, but safe. He wrapped her in his coat and gave her the last water in his canteen. She still hadn't said a word, but she looked at him now with something new in her eyes, not fear, not pain, but hope. Kyle sat beside her and stared at the stars above. His hands still trembling from adrenaline and exhaustion. He whispered to no one, "What the hell am I doing?" But deep down he knew he wasn't saving an alien child. He was saving a life, and in doing so, he was saving something inside himself. Hadn't felt this kind of purpose since before the war, since before he lost his unit, his friends, his own hope. The girl shifted beside him and leaned against his arm. It was a small gesture, but it hit him like thunder. She had chosen to trust him, even after everything, even after the war. Kyle looked down at her. Silver eyes were half closed now, her breathing slow and steady. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she had any family left. He didn't even know if she would survive the night. But he made a promise to himself: if she lived, he would protect her, raise her, give her a chance at a life free from fear, from hate, from war. Somewhere far beyond the stars, in a chamber of ancient stone and glowing crystal, a woman stood frozen, her skin the same pale blue, her eyes the same silver. She had been in deep cryo sleep for years, believed to be lost, believed to be dead. Now her heart raced in her chest. She clutched at her stomach like something sacred had moved inside her. And then she spoke one word, only so soft the air barely heard it. Vara. That was the child's name, the daughter she had lost to war, the daughter she had never stopped searching for. She was alive, she was awake, and someone somewhere had just saved her. The world had moved on from the war. Flags were lowered, weapons were stored, people returned to their homes and tried to forget the blood that stained the stars. But for Sergeant Kyle Morgan, there was no going back to normal, not with Vera now in his life. She was no longer just the alien child he rescued from the ashes. She was his responsibility, his mission, his daughter. At first it was not easy. Authorities had questions reports, were filed whispers spread like wildfire decorated human soldier had brought. Home of Virian child, the very species Earth had fought against for decades. Some wanted her tested, some wanted her taken, but Kyle refused every order, he signed every document, he swore before every council he would raise her as his own and somehow the world. Let him. Kyle moved away from the city. He chose a quiet town near the forest where few asked questions, where he could give Vara the life she deserved. She had never seen trees before, or rain or snow. The first time snowflakes touched her skin, she laughed a real laugh that made Kyle stop in his tracks. That laugh reminded him why he had risked everything. She was still a child, a soul unbroken by war. She deserved more than a battlefield, so he built a new life. He learned how to cook Virian-friendly meals. From old archives, he painted stars on her bedroom ceiling, so she would never forget where she came from. He read her stories at night, both human and alien tales of courage, of kindness, of hope. Vara grew fast. Her mind was sharp. She could speak human languages within weeks, but she also spoke in ways Kyle did not understand. She could sense emotions like wind on her skin. She could feel sadness before it was spoken. She would touch Kyle's hand when he tried to hide his pain, and somehow she always knew when he needed her most. She did not ask about the war, not at first, but one night as they sat by the fireplace, she looked up at him and asked the question he feared most. Why did they fight? As Kyle had no answer. He could only say what he believed. Now sometimes people are afraid of what they do not understand, but we are not enemies anymore. You are safe here. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the fire. There was still a storm inside her. Memories locked away, things she could not yet say. Kyle never pushed her, waited, and when the nightmares came, when she woke up screaming in alien tongues, he held her, told her she was safe. He would never leave her, that she was loved. In time the screams faded. In time her drawings changed, no longer filled with fire and broken ships. Now she drew people, a man with tired eyes and a little girl with silver hair holding hands under a human sky. One day at school a boy called her a monster, said she did not belong here. She did not cry, she did not speak, she only walked home in silence. That night she asked Kyle a new question, am I a monster? Kyle knelt beside her and took her hand. You are my daughter, you are strong, you are kind, and nothing in this world will ever change that. Smiled, but it was small, her heart still healing, still searching. In the months that followed she made friends, she planted flowers in the backyard. She built models of her homeworld from clay and placed them on her shelf. She began to laugh more, sing more, live more. Kyle watched all of it with quiet pride. He had never imagined himself a father, but now he could not imagine being anything else. Vara gave him a reason to wake up each day, to breathe deeply, to love again. She was the light in the silence, heartbeat in the quiet, but across the stars in a distant galaxy cloaked in starlight and sorrow. Tusha stirred in her chamber, the mother long thought lost, the queen who vanished in war. The heart that had broken in silence was alive, and the bond she once shared with her daughter had returned. It started as a whisper in culture, her mind, then a warmth in her chest, then a name that rang through her thoughts. Vara, the daughter she believed dead, now called to her again. Tusha activated an ancient device buried deep beneath the ruins of her palace, a tracker linked to the blood of her child. It glowed for the first time in years, and it pointed to Earth. Tusha stood still for a long time, memories flooding her. The moment she had to let go of her infant daughter to protect her from death. The fire, the escape, the silence that followed. Now she knew the truth. Her child had survived, and someone had kept her safe. Someone not of her kind, but someone who mattered. Usha did not weep, but her voice trembled as she whispered to the stars, I am coming back on Earth. Kyle sat on the porch watching Vara chase fireflies in the dark. She moved like the night itself, light on her feet, eyes glowing softly. He thought about the first day he found her, the ashes, the rubble, the silence. Now she was dancing, now she was laughing, and he knew he had done the right thing, had saved a life. But what he did not know was that another life, long lost and far away, had just awakened. Then that life was coming to Earth, not with weapons, not with fire, but with a heart full of questions, a message that would change everything again. 12 years had passed since Kyle Morgan carried a lost alien child through the ashes of a dead battlefield. 12 years since he held her shivering body against his chest and made the choice that changed both of their lives. The world had forgotten the war, but Kyle remembered. He remembered everything. Every scream, every loss, every silent night when he stayed awake, just to make sure. Vara kept breathing. Now she was no longer the broken little girl hiding under rubble. She was bright, curious, strong, and beautiful in a way that made people stop and stare. Her silver hair flowed like soft light, and her eyes still held that same glow, but now they sparkled with laughter, with life. She was 16, and she had become the soul of Kyle's world. He watched her grow up with a mixture of pride and fear that someone would one day come to take her back, fear that the world would not be ready to understand, fear that his past would return. That fear came true on the night of her 16th birthday. It started as a low hum in the sky, barely there, like a whisper at the edge of hearing. Kyle stood in the backyard, stringing lights across the trees, was inside laughing with her friends. There was cake on the table, balloons floating in the air. Everything was perfect until the sky split open above the house, just beyond the tree liner. Silver light shimmered in the clouds, not lightning, not a storm, something smooth, alive, silent. Spacecraft unlike any human design, no engines, no wings, just a floating vessel shaped like a tear of crystal and metal. It made no sound, but Kyle felt it in his bones, felt it like the weight of the past crashing through his door. Ship landed quietly in the clearing behind the house. Kyle reached for the old rifle he had buried in the shed. He hadn't touched it in years, but now his hands moved with old memory. He ran into the clearing, ready to defend, ready to protect. Hatch opened with a slow breath of light, and then she stepped out, not a soldier, not a machine, but a woman, tall, elegant, wearing robes that shimmered like starlight. Her skin was pale blue like Vara's, her hair silver and woven with thin bands of light. Her eyes, those eyes, they matched Vara's perfectly. She walked forward with grace that felt ancient, like someone who had once ruled planets, now humbled by something deeper than power. Kyle raised the rifle. Stop right there. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, just looked at him with eyes full of silence and storm. Then she said it, one sentence that froze him to the ground. You have my daughter. His heart stopped, his mind raced, and she spoke again. Now you must take me too. Behind him, Vara came running out, the lights still flickering in the backyard. She saw the ship, she saw the woman, and everything inside her shifted. Her legs stopped moving, her mouth opened, but no words came because her soul already knew. She had never seen this woman before, but she knew her. She felt it in her blood, in her breath, and the way her heartbeat changed. Kyle lowered the rifle slowly, his voice cracked. Who are you? Woman placed her hand on her chest and spoke her Nami, Tusha, mother of Vara, last of the Virian queens, a title she no longer used, a throne she no longer claimed. Kyle wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where had she been? Why now? How had she survived? None of that mattered in this moment, because Vara was walking toward her, step by step, her eyes wide, tears threatening to fall. She stopped just a few feet away and asked a question her voice barely carried. Why did you leave me? Tusha's face broke. Strength in her posture softened and her voice trembled. To save you, because if I had stayed, you would have died. I sent you away with the last of my strength, and I have searched for you across stars and time. You are my child, my only child. Vara stood still, her eyes searching this woman's face, looking for answers, looking for the truth. Kyle stepped forward. He placed a hand on Vara's shoulder. She turned to him with tears falling now, but not from pain, from confusion, from hope, from something she had never dared to believe. Kyle looked at Tusha and asked quietly, what do you want? Tusha looked at Vara, then at Kyle, then back at the sky, as if remembering something far away. I want nothing except to stay near her, to know her, to understand the man who raised her when I could not. Kyle didn't know what to say. He had feared this moment for years, the day someone came to take her away. But Tusha didn't come with soldiers. She came with sorrow, with longing, with eyes that had cried in silence for too long. He didn't trust her yet, but he saw something in her, the same something he had seen in Vara all those years ago. soul that had survived the impossible. Vara spoke again, her voice steady now. You want to stay with you? Tusha nodded. Only if you want me to. Only if he wants me to. Her eyes flicked to Kyle, and there was something else there, something deeper. Kyle didn't answer right away. He looked at Vera, at the girl he had raised, the daughter he had loved with all his broken heart. She was not choosing between them. She was asking him to open the door, to let someone in, someone from her past, someone who might belong in her future. Wind blew gently through the trees. The stars above were silent witnesses. Kyle took a slow breath, then he lowered the rifle fully, and he said the words that changed everything again. You can stay for now. That night the birthday lights still glowed in the trees. Vara sat between them, one hand in Kyle's own hand in Tusha's own. For the first time in her life she didn't feel torn between worlds. She felt whole, but deep inside Kyle's question still burned. Why had Tusha really come now, and what had she meant when she said, "Now you must take me too"? The next morning came quietly. Sunlight slipped through the curtains of a small earth house tucked deep in the woods. Birds sang without knowing anything had changed, but inside the house everything was different. No Tusha was here in Kyle's world. No longer a shadow in the stars, now flesh and blood. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the old human appliances like they were museum pieces. Kyle watched her from the hallway. She wore a soft gray robe Vara had picked from the guest room closet. The robe was human, but nothing else about her was her. Every movement was calm and graceful, like a storm held back by silence. Silver hair shimmered as if light clung to it, and her voice, when she finally spoke, was both warm and distant. "This machine burns food on purpose." Kyle stepped into the room. "It's called a toaster." She looked at him and tilted her head. "And this bread that you feed into it, it's some form of offering." He gave a half smile. "To the gods of breakfast, maybe." Tusha blinked slowly, then a soft laugh escaped her lips. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. It felt strange, almost human. But Kyle did not relax. He was still watching her, still waiting for the moment when she would reveal her true purpose. Why had she really come? Why now, and what did she mean when she said, "Now you must take me to"? She had not explained. She had only thanked him that night, then gone to bed in silence. Now she acted as if she belonged here, helping Vara set the table, feeding the dog when it barked, asking questions about Earth life with genuine curiosity. But Kyle could not forget. She was Virench had once been a queen, a commander during the war. She had been his enemy, and yet every time she looked at Vera there was no calculation, only love, the kind of love that hurt to look at, the kind of love that made Kyle question what was right. Later that afternoon, Vara sat on the porch with a brush in hand, braiding her mother's long silver hair as they talked about things Kyle could not understand, old names, memories of stars with no names in human tongues, told stories of their people, of how she had been forced to send her infant daughter away when her planet was attacked, of how she had believed Vara had died, of how her own ship had been crippled and left floating in deep space until she was rescued by a forgotten Virian outpost. Vara listened in silence, her hands careful, her heart uncertain. Kyle stayed by the door, not interrupting, but listening to every word. When the sun dipped, Lodosha turned to Kyle and asked something unexpected. "Would you take me into town?" He hesitated. "Why?" "Want to see where you raised Harry. Want to see the world you gave my daughter." Kyle wanted to say no, but Vera looked at him with that same silent request she always used when she needed him to try, so he agreed. They drove in silence, the truck bumping softly down the gravel road. Tusha stared out the window like a traveler seeing a new planet for the first time. She asked questions about the trees, about the roads, about the birds. Kyle answered with short words, still guarded, still watching. They stopped at the grocery store. People turned. They always turned when they saw Vara, but now they turned more at the sight of Tusha walking beside Kyle with poise and stillness, like royalty among mortals. Kyle expected fear, but something strange happened. People smiled. An old woman at the counter handed Tusha a flower. She said it matched her eyes. Tusha took it with a soft thank you that sounded sincere. Afterward, in the truck, she held the flower carefully between her fingers. "Your people are softer than I thought." Kyle nodded. "Most are, some are not." She looked at him then directly, and asked what he had not expected. "Do you hate me?" He stared ahead at the road. "I don't know. I wanted to for a long time, but I don't think I can." Tosha said nothing. She looked back out the window, but her hand touched the flower again. That night after Vara went to bed, Kyle sat alone on the back porch. The stars were out clear and cold above the trees. Tosha stepped outside and stood beside him. Neither spoke for a long time. Then she broke the silence. "She dreams in Vareen did. You know that?" Kyle nodded. "She started doing that a few years ago. She doesn't remember much of your language when she wakes up, but she speaks it while she sleeps." Tosha smiled softly. "That is how I found her, through the echoes in the sleep bond." Kyle turned toward her. "What are you really doing?" Tosha faced him fully now, the air between them suddenly heavier. "I came for her, that is true, but I stayed for something else." He waited. Her voice was calm but quiet. "I saw what you gave her, not just safety, not just food and a roof. You gave her something no Virian royal could offer. You gave her choice, you gave her joy." And she paused, searching for the right words. "I have never known such things myself." Kyle looked at her, really looked at her, the lines of age beneath her perfect skin, the weight in her eyes. "You said I must take you too. What does that mean?" Tosha stepped closer. "It means I no longer wish to stand alone. It means if you have adopted her as your daughter, then I ask you to let me be something more out of you. Not as a queen, not as an alien, but as someone broken by war, saved by love, and hoping for a place in your world." Kyle did not speak. Could not. His heart beat louder than the wind in the trees. Tosha stepped back. "I will not ask again. I will not beg. But I will wait as long as I must." She turned and walked inside, leaving Kyle standing under the stars, alone and sure, and no longer certain who the enemy truly was. The days after that night moved quietly. No words were spoken between Kyle and Tosha about what she had said beneath the stars. But her presence lingered in his thoughts, her voice echoed in the corners of his mind, and her eyes kept pulling questions out of places he had long buried. Tosha stayed in the guest room. She moved through the house like a ghost, made of starlight and silence. She cooked meals from both her culture and his. She helped Vara with her studies. She repaired broken lights without asking. Kyle watched all of it with caution, not because he saw danger, but because he saw something else, something he did not know how to name. That frightened him more than any war ever had. One morning, while Kyle sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee in hand, Tosha stepped out quietly and stood beside him. She did not sit. She looked out toward the trees. Then she said something strange. "You humans chase silence with noise. You fill the quiet with music and machines. But silence is not the enemy. It holds the truth we are afraid to hear." Kyle sipped his coffee and said nothing. Tosha continued. "I used to command ships that spanned continents. Thousands obeyed my voice without question. But none of them ever asked me how I felt. Not once." Kyle looked at her now. "And how do you feel?" Tosha closed her eyes, afraid, hopeful, old, alive all at once. He watched her for a moment, then asked a question he had never dared before. "Were you ever in love?" Tosha opened her eyes. "A long time ago. He was not Varan, was from another world we made alliance with. He gave me poetry in a language I never fully understood. I felt the shape of his heart in his words." Kyle leaned forward. "What happened to him?" She paused, then spoke with a kind of still pain that never fades. "He died protecting me. They ambushed our vessel during a peace mission. He stepped between me and the fire and Feu. For years after, I hated him for that, because he left me alone in a war I did not want to fight." Kyle nodded slowly. "And now do you still hate him?" Tosha looked at the sky. "No, now I just miss him, and sometimes I wonder what he would think of you." Kyle blinked, caught off guard. "Me because you remind me of him, not in the way you look or speak, but in the way you carry pain without showing it, in the way you protect without asking for reward. You saved my daughter not for honor, but for love. That is something rare and dangerous." Kyle placed the empty mug on the table beside him. "Dangerous how?" Tosha sat down beside him for the first time. "Because love demands everything, and it gives no promise in return." He looked at her. "And you give everything?" She did not answer right away. Then She reached into her robe and pulled out a small pendant shaped like a spiral of stars, opened it, and inside was a holographic image. Younger Tusha holding a baby with silver eyes. That is all I have left from my old life. I carried it through fire and ice and deep sleep, but if you ask me to give it up for her, for this life, I... Without hesitation, Kyle took the pendant, gently studied. The image, the baby looked like Vara but smaller, fragile, hopeful. He handed it back to her, and for the first time he saw the edge of tears in her eyes. That night as Vara slept, Kyle found himself walking through the hallway toward Tusha's door. He did not knock. He stood there still silent. Then he turned and walked away. He was not ready, but something inside him was changing. Next day, they visited the town together. Vara wanted books. Tusha asked to come along at the bookstore, while Vara wandered between shelves. Kyle and Tusha stood near a window that looked out onto the street. A little girl passed by holding her father's hand. She looked up and smiled at Tusha. Without further, Tusha smiled back, then whispered, "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Kyle turned to her every day, but then I look at Vara and I think if things had been different, maybe I would have never met her, and I would rather live with scars than lose that. Tusha nodded slowly. Then she said something he would never forget. Then maybe we are not here by accident. Maybe we were always meant to find each other. Back at the house, as the stars returned above the forest, Kyle sat by the fire while Vara and Tusha played a game from the Virian world. He watched them laugh, their movements in sync, like music and rhythm, and for a moment he felt something strange. He did not feel alone. Later that night, he stood outside staring up at the stars. Tusha joined him again. This time, she brought something with her, a small silver sphere. She placed it in his hand. "What is it?" "It contains the last messages I sent into the void, searching for her, searching for answers. I want you to have it." "Why me?" "Because even in my most desperate moments, even when I thought no one would ever find her, somehow you did. You found her, and you brought her back to life." He held the sphere, felt the soft hum of energy, felt the weight of years and memories inside. Tusha looked at him. "I cannot promise who I will be in 5 years or 50. But I can promise this: I will never take her from you. I will never ask her to choose between us, because she already chose. She chose both of us." Kyle looked at her, and this time he reached for her hand. It was warm and it trembled just a little, like someone who had held power for too long and had finally let herself feel under the stars. They stood in silence, not as soldier and alien, not as man and queen, but as two souls learning how to heal together. The nights had grown quieter in Kyle's home, not because there was silence, but because there was peace, a kind of peace that was rare after war, a kind of peace that only came when two wounded souls began to trust again. Kyle sat by the window late into the night. Vara was asleep upstairs. The house glowed softly with warm lights, and outside the moon hung low above the trees. Tusha entered the room without a sound. She had learned to move like the shadows, always calm, always quiet. But tonight something was different. She did not carry a book or tea or stories from her world. She stood near the doorway, her eyes locked on Kyle's face, and in her hands she held nothing but the air. He looked up at her. "You can't sleep." She shook her head slowly. "There's something I need to say, something I have waited to say until I understood it myself." Kyle stood now, feeling the shift in the room. Tusha took a step closer. "You adopted my daughter. You saved her. You gave her more than I ever could, and in doing so, you changed everything I thought I knew about humans." Kyle listened, silent and moving, but inside his chest his heart was no longer still. Tusha kept going. "I said you must take me, Toi. Did not mean it as a demand. I did not mean it as a duty. I meant it as a choice. Hope, a truth I did not understand then. But I do now. I am asking you, not as a queen, not as a soldier, but as a woman who has spent most of her life alone. Take me too. Not because I am her mother, not because we share her love, but because somewhere in all these moments, somewhere between the quiet dinners and the long walks and the way you say her name like it's the most sacred thing you know, I began to see you, not as an enemy, not as her protector, as the man who found me, even when I did not know I was lost." Kyle felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. He stepped forward slowly and said only one word. "Would." Tusha looked up at him. because I want to stay where I feel alive. I am not royalty, where I am not legend, where I am simply someone who loves. He searched her eyes. He had seen so many things in them: pain, wisdom, power. But now he saw something softer, something raw, vulnerability. He spoke careful. You're asking me to become something I never imagined. Her mother and I under the same roof, sharing the same life. Do you know what people would say? Tusha nodded. Let them speak, let them wonder, let them question, but do not let them decide what looks like for us. Kyle looked away for a moment, his thoughts turning to all the years he had spent building walls, walls to keep others out, walls to protect Vara, walls to protect his own broken heart. And yet, Tusha had walked through those walls without force. She had entered without permission, but also without demand. He looked back at her, and in that quiet moment, whispered the truth he had held for too long. I never thought I would love again. Not after what I lost, not after the war. But here you are standing in front of me, and the only thing I fear now is what happens if I let myself believe this is real. Tusha stepped closer. Then let me be the one who shows you that let me prove that what we have here, what we've built with her, what we could become together, is not something to fear, but something to hold on to. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing his, and this time he did not pull away. His hand met hers with quiet certainty. There were no promises spoken, no grand confessions, only breath and touch, and the space between them no longer filled with doubt. Later that night, they sat on the couch while the fire burned low. Kyle placed a blanket over her shoulders. She rested her head on his arm, and for the first time neither of them felt like they were carrying the past alone. In Imode, the quiet hum of the house, Vara stood halfway down the stairs, watching them. She said nothing. She only smiled, because even though she had never asked for this, even though she had feared what would happen if her two worlds met, she now saw something she had never dared to dream of: a family, not one made by blood or species, but by choice, by love, by healing. The next morning, they stood in the kitchen together. Vara made breakfast. Kyle read the news aloud. Tusha adjusted the spice levels in the pan because she still could not handle the human taste of pepper. Laughter filled the room, and for a brief moment, there was no war, no loss, no past, only the present. Only a life they were all learning to live. Tusha turned to Kyle while Vara was at the table. There is something else you need to know, something I kept from you, because I was afraid it would change how you see me. Kyle waited, prepared for anything. Tusha placed a small crystal on the counter. This is a communicator linked to the surviving Virian colonies. If I activated it, they would come for me, come for her, come for all of us. Kyle felt his hands tighten. Then why haven't you used it? Tusha looked him in the eye. Because I am not going back, because this life here is the one I choose, and if they come for me, will protect this family with everything I have. Kyle looked at her for a long moment, then picked up the crystal, walked to the backyard, and threw it deep into the woods. No more secrets. Tusha's eyes filled with something ancient, something full of depth, and she whispered, no more secrets. That night, as they stood by the window watching the stars, Kyle reached for her hand again. This time there was no fear, no hesitation, only one sentence: you can stay, not because I have to take you, but because I want. Tusha leaned against him, and in the silence that followed, the stars did not speak, but they watched as two hearts once broken by war began to write a new story together. The world outside kept turning, nations debated over politics, skies filled with traffic and news, but inside a quiet home, surrounded by trees and sky, something rare was taking shape. Not a new government, not a military alliance, but something far more dangerous, something powerful enough to change everything. A family, not the kind written in blood, the kind built from choice, from pain, from healing, and from love. Kyle stood in the backyard early one morning. Sun barely above the horizon, he watched the mist curl over the grass. Birdsong filled the silence, but his thoughts were far away. He had never imagined this kind of life, not after war, not after the loss of his squad, not after all the years of grief, and yet now he had something more than peace. He had purpose behind him. The screen door opened. Tusha stepped out holding 2 cups of tea. She wore one of his old shirts. hung loose on her shoulders, but it looked right. She handed him a cup, steam rising in the cold air. You always wake before the sun. He smiled. Old habits, hard to break. They stood side by side in silence, the kind of silence that speaks without words. Tusha looked at the trees, then at Kyle. Have you told her yet? Kyle shook his head. Not yet. I will. She needs to hear it from me. Tusha nodded slowly. She already knows, but she needs to hear it anyway. Later that morning, Vara sat at the table drawing in her sketch pattern, hair tied in a loose braid. She looked peaceful, happy. Kyle sat across from her, and for a moment he just watched, trying to memorize the way she looked in this exact second. The way the sunlight caught her silver eyes. He cleared his throat. Vara looked up. Yeah. Kyle took a breath. There's something I need to say, something I've wanted to say for a long time, but I never knew how. Vara put her pencil down, her eyes locked on his. You don't have to. I already know. Kyle smiled softly, but I want to. He leaned forward. When I found you that day in the rubble, you were just a scared little girl who had lost everything. I thought I was saving you, but the truth is you saved me. You gave me a reason to wake up, a reason to be something better. I didn't just protect you. I didn't just raise you. I became your father, not because someone told me to, but because I chose to be, and I would choose you again every single time. Vara's lips trembled. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled. I love you, Dad. Kyle's heart broke and healed at the same time. He reached out, and she crossed the table to wrap her arms around him. Tusha stood by the doorway watching, silent, a single tear on her cheek. That night they all sat together in the living room. The fire was low. Vara leaned against Kyle's city. Tusha curled near his other shoulder, a blanket over all three of them. The television played an old Earth movie, one with laughter and simple stories. Vara pointed to the screen. That's what I want to do. Kyle raised an eyebrow. Make movies, not just movie stories. Stories that show people like us, people who don't fit in the old boxes. Tusha smiled. You will. Your voice matters. Vara looked between them. Where kind of weird, you know, a human and alien queen, and a girl who doesn't belong to either world. Kyle smiled. Maybe, but we belong to each other, and that's enough. The next morning a message arrived, not from Earth, but from the Virian colonies. Encrypted, quiet, respectful. They had found traces of Tusha's communicator signal before it was destroyed. They wanted to meet, to talk. No threats, no demands, only a simple request. We would like to know if our queen lives. Kyle read the message twice, then brought it to Tusha. Read it once, then folded the screen shut. I do not want to go back. Kyle nodded. Then don't. They may keep trying. We can't stay hidden forever. Tusha looked at him, then looked at Vara playing with the dog in the yard. I am not hiding. I am choosing. If they come, they will come in peace or not at all. And if they don't, Kyle placed a hand over hers, then they'll have to go through both of us. Vara walked in with a painting in her hand. She had finished a drawing. 3 figures standing beneath a tree, one with a rifle and a kind smile, one with silver hair and gentle eyes, and one in between, holding both their hands. Kyle took the drawing, looked at it for a long moment, then walked to the wall and hung it in the center of the living room. No medals, no flags, no war banners, just a drawing of what they had become. Weeks passed. Tusha helped rebuild a nearby shelter using Virian energy tech. Kyle joined a team teaching peaceful negotiation to military officers. Vara applied for a creative scholarship at an interspecies school. Her application essay began with just 6 words. I was raised by the enemy, and ended with, and I would not change a thing. On a quiet evening, as the stars blinked into place one by one, Tusha sat with Kyle under the tree behind their house. The wind was warm, the sky endless, and she asked a question that sounded like a whisper across galaxies. Are you happy? Kyle looked at her, then up at the stars, then at the home they had built. I think for the first time I finally am. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and in that silence, they both understood something powerful. Family is not born, it is chosen, forged in fire, and made real by love.